Alright, welcome back to another Learn PowerShell video. We're going to be going over day 5 of the Advent of Code series today. I did skip 4, but hopefully I have 5 posted today, 2 videos in one day as promised. So in this one, what we need to do, again, you can pause here to read the storyline if you'd like, again, or just sign up for Advent of Code. It's free, and I do encourage everyone to do it to learn and challenge yourself. Anyway, in this one, what we have is coordinates, x and y coordinates. On the left is our starting position, on the right is our ending position. So each line is x1, y1, x2, y2. Line segment where we start, the other is the end, and these lines segments include the points at both ends. In other words, for 1, 1 to 1, 3, we cover 1, 1, 1, 2, and 1, 3, and so forth. This part is very simple to understand. Hopefully you have taken some form of graphing or plotting course, whether through elementary or intermediate school, and remember that a little bit. So if this was our x plane across horizontally and our y plane vertically, these are the points that get mapped. So unlike traditional plotting, where we would be moving up and to the right in space, we're moving down and to the right based on the coordinates. So this is 0, 0, and from here we move in space around here. So if you look at this graph and read what they have here, it says that intersecting points create a value greater than 1. So a 1 is just a point on the line. A 2 is where at least one line intersects with another line, where there's a cross. So you have to count up however many overlaps there are. So here there's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And this gives us a total of 5 points. So it says consider only horizontal and vertical lines. How many points do at least 2 lines overlap? So let's go and take a look at that in VS Code. Alright, so also I do want to note a couple of things. One, obviously I've changed my theme. I think this is a little bit easier to see what's going on in the videos, and also I prefer it a lot better. I think it's a high contrast theme, which gives a lot of clarity when you're reviewing these online, and also while I'm coding, it's easier on my eyes, especially at night, because I don't have all the strain from light colors and I don't have anything too bright. These are all pretty soft. There are other themes that are softer, but I think that they are still a little hard to decipher when you're watching a video. So this is the one that I settled on. So just to get that out of the way, because if you've watched any of the other videos, you will notice this change. So this is going to be my second time recording day 5. So I want to establish that what I've done in the time in between the first time I recorded it, when I recorded it in the wrong video format, to now is rewritten my code entirely. I had about 50 something lines of code before, and I've consolidated that to I think about 25 or 26 lines, including spacing. So it's a lot shorter code, and it accomplishes the same thing and actually sets us up for part 2 in a very good and clean way. So let's go ahead and load this puzzle up, and let's take a look at what we have. I'm just going to look at the last value. So for the last value, we have a start x of 872, end x of 233, a start y of 63, and an end y of 63. This is good. So what I pointed out was that we're only paying attention to vertical or horizontal lines, which means that either the x has to be the same in both the start and the end, and x in the same starting and end point means we have a vertical line, because our horizontal plane doesn't change, whereas a horizontal line, our vertical plane doesn't change, as you see here. So in space vertically it's 63 points down or up, however you want to think about it, and horizontally it's varying widely. So just want you to remember that, because we only want to look at vertical and horizontal lines to start. So the first thing we need to do is we know that we're going to step through each line like we do normally. So for each line in puzzle, and from here we're going to start exploring a little bit. So the first thing we need to do is create some isolation. So I'm going to create an inline variable declaration for two variables. So we're going to say that our line, and we're going to split it, and we're going to split at this double space arrow. So what that will do is create two separate objects, 833 and 63 and 233 and 63, and it will put them in order in the variables that we've assigned. So 872 is going to go in the start, and 233 is going to go in the end. If I run that, it looks like this, which is easy for us because now we have a start and end split up already. So now let's do the same thing, and now let's break out the y's and the x's. So start x and start y, and we're going to say start, and we're going to split at the comma, and end x and end y, and we're also going to split at the comma. Alright, so what that gives us is the same thing. So since we have the two variables, so we have start x and end x, and start y and end y. Alright, so from here, now we need to make sure that either our x doesn't change or our y doesn't change, because we only want horizontal or vertical lines. I keep reiterating that because that's what this piece is about. So if start x equals end x, or start y equals end y, then we want to run this code. So what we're going to do is we're going to say that our x array is combination of the start x all the way to the end x. So one thing I did the first time I wrote this is actually sorted this in sequentially. We don't need to do that because PowerShell is perfectly capable at counting backwards, every language is. So there's no need to explicitly put them in order. That also would be very bad for what is going to come later, because we don't want to have to, we want to rewrite as little of this as possible, because we've probably seen a trend that part 2 usually has a lot to do with what we did in part 1, maybe just expand it a little bit. So we want to try to minimize the amount of rewrites we have to do by keeping things as generic as possible. So our y array is going to do the same thing, start y to end y. And then we're going to establish this total count variable because we need to figure out how many objects there are. So x array dot count plus y array dot count, and then we're going to subtract 1, because the way we're going to count this is we're going to run a for each based on this total count, and one of these only has one number in it, either the x array or the y array. We don't care which one, but we do know that we don't want to run the code that extra time because there's not going to be anything extra in either of them, because we're explicitly applying the x and y variable to our table at the same time. And let me actually come back up here and establish that table. So we've dynamically created hash tables before, and that's exactly what we're going to do this time. We're going to be creating a reverse lookup table based on the information, so we can count how many points there are that have more than one intersection point, or one dot on them, essentially. So now after we've done that, we can say another for each. So for each in 1 to total count, and that's going to count all of these. So let's say there was 500, actually let's say 501 of these combined. There was 500 and then 1. It would subtract that 1, so it's only going to run 500 times, making sure that we only apply changes for the 500 different y variables rather than adding 1, because we're applying the x every time for all of the 500 y's. And that'll make more sense here in a second. So I is going to equal n minus 1, because our initialization point should always be at 0. Remember that. And n starts at 1. So we need to subtract 1 and then count all the way up to whatever this is, or minus 1 effectively. So let's say if our xarray dot count is greater than 1, then we know that the xarray is the plane that we will be moving on. So let's say that our x is going to equal xarray I for the index of whatever we're in, and our y is not going to change. And although we've created it as an array, so if I look at this, let's look at the x array first. So there's all our numbers, but our y array, even though we've told it it's an array, we know that start y and the end y are both 63. Even though we're telling it there's a range of numbers, PowerShell's not going to think that we're dumb, or it may think we're dumb, but it's going to fill in the blanks for us and say, look, this is only one number. I'm not going to count it twice. I'm not going to fill in the blanks between these two numbers. It's just this number. So that logic is sound and can stay the same. But we need to now tell it, don't try to step into anything, because if I try to, let's say this was on the 15th iteration of the code, n was 15. So if n equals 15, what's going to happen is this is going to say that I is n minus 1, and then it's going to try to do this. So x becomes 858, because that's the 15th number in the sequence, because n minus 1, 0. Anyways, even though I is 14. And if I try that here, even though we only have one number in there, it is going to do nothing, because there is no item at that index point. So we need to just say that this actually is always 0 if we're moving on the x plane. And then say that if we're moving on the y plane, just the opposite is true. So x equals x array 0, and y equals y array I. And after we've done that, we can just say that we're going to add to that plotter, oops, and dynamically create the entry with $x hyphen $y in quotations, because if we don't do quotations, what's going to happen is it's going to do math on these two, and we don't want that. We want to make sure that we implicitly state this is a variable, and I just want you to use the result of that variable and the result of this variable. And we're going to say plus equals 1, and we're going to run this really quick. Where's that I at? Okay. It's a wasted space in here. Okay, so now if I look at plotter, and this will take 10-15 seconds or so. If you're on a slower computer, it'll obviously take longer. But as you can see, there's lots and lots of points there. I don't want to have to count those, so what I'm going to do is say in parentheses plotter.values because it's a hash table, and I'm going to say where object is greater than 1, and we're just going to count that. Oh, I missed a B. There we go. 7,318. And if you were paying attention when I had the screen up for Advent of Code, which I will put up now, my answer was 7,318, so we do know that that code is correct. So now I'm just going to move right on to the second bit of code. So unfortunately, you did it wrong, and you have to consider diagonal lines as well. And the diagonal lines have to be at 45 degrees. We're only considering 45-degree lines, so moving, +1, -1 in either direction. And so when I first tried approaching this, there was a lot of things that I thought were variables that are not actually. So let's go back to VS Code and take a look at this. So what we have here is an issue where we've established that we only want to look at this where they're horizontal lines. So now we want to look at diagonal lines as well, and that complicates things a little bit. So let's just add an else if here. And what we're going to do is just make sure that our x count equals our y count in the array. I know that makes things a little complicated, but if you think about it, if the total number of x moves is the total number of y moves, then we've moved 1 for 1, and it doesn't matter if it was plus or minus, it doesn't matter anything. We've moved 1 for 1 in every direction, or in any direction, and so it is a 45-degree line. If one number is greater than the other, the value changes drastically on the degree of the line, so we want to make sure that the total number of x array count is the total number of y array count. So what we need to do here is figure that out. So we can add something here. We can say or whatever it is, but it's easier if we just do it out here because we don't want to have to change all of these zeros out because those are horizontal and diagonal lines. It shortens it up quite a bit. We don't have to separate them as doing their whole counts and doing this whole piece separately. So we can actually do this where we take this out of here because that doesn't change. Move it up here. And now we say else if xarray.count equals yarray.count, and that is a 45-degree line, so that's a diagonal line. And now we do almost the same thing. So for each in 1, 2 total count, and then we can say that I equals n minus 1, and we can just do this. X equals x array I, and y equals y array y I, and then we plot that. So now we can take this, because we're just plotting again x and y, and take this out of here, and move it outside of this if-else statement because we're going to be doing it regardless as long as it fits in one of those. And you're only creating x and y inside of this. So to be safe, to make sure that we're always going to do something, we can remove variable x and y, just to be safe, to make sure that we're not getting any erroneous hanging data. And we can now run this again. And we can then run that very last line again. That's not right. YArray.count, they should not be yet, 641, so that one didn't run. So let's run this on -2, or sorry, on 2 to figure this out. So let's run all of this and make sure that our xArray.count and our YArray.count both 228. That's perfectly fine. Our total count is -1, and that is not correct. Our new total count should be something completely different. It should not be -1, it should just be whatever the array size is. So let's just use xArray.count because they should be exactly the same. So adding them together is like 500 something and it's crazy. So now let's try running all of this all over again. And I got an error. That's fine. Cannot find y, but the count is still 1. So let's try this again. Line equals puzzle 2. Run all of this again. And figure out, so let's just run, this is an if statement. We have an x, we have a y, and what is n? N is 1, so I should be 0. I is not. Oh, yeah, it's the last time it ran. -1, 227, that's fine. So the next numbers in line should be 3, well, I guess I'd have to look at this. Let's look at endx 364 and ny should be 220 or 644. Okay, so those are right. So why is it not? What's in the plotter? Definitely more than one entry. But it is broken because there's not a lot of entries here. Make sure I didn't typo anything. Let's put this back inside of here and put it back inside of here. Let's see if that helps. Yep, that's what it was. So what's happening is every iteration of the for each, these x and y variables get removed. So what was happening is it's just abolishing this since it doesn't want to plot it. So keep those inside of your for each. You can test this by running a for each and like creating a variable inside of it. With functions, the same thing happens. So just make sure, or I could have added it just out. No, I couldn't have even. Yeah, I could have added it right here instead. But just keep it in the for each. That way it does it for. Actually, I couldn't have done it. So that's actually what was happening. And that was my fault. So what's happening is every time it runs this for each and nothing's being plotted, it's not keeping it. So it's staying inside of this loop and never actually doing anything with the values. So that was a colossal mistake on my part, and I do apologize. But it just goes to show you that you're probably going to make mistakes, and it's not going to break anything. Don't get discouraged. It happens all the time to everyone. I promise you there is no scripter that I've ever come across that has never made a mistake. And if there was, they're probably not telling the truth, because if they were never making mistakes, they'd either be writing the same arbitrary code like write host hello world over and over and over again. And even then, you can probably typo something and mess up. So that's day 5. I can show you again the solution. Pulling that up, 19,939, which is exactly as I had here, 19,939. So thank you for watching another video. I will be back with you soon once I have conquered day 6. Have a great one.